Why did three veterans at the table behind her suddenly rise, like ghosts had walked into the room? Laura West hadn't done anything, at least nothing she hadn't done 100 times before. She'd only swiveled in her chair, reaching down for the notebook she'd dropped under the cafeteria table. But in that brief movement, the hem of her polo shirt lifted just high enough for a single glimpse to escape, just long enough for the world around her to shift. The edge of a black tattoo, a war eagle with talons extended, wings stretched wide as if clawing for the sky. And beneath it, a string of code numbers and letters burned into memory the way only certain soldiers, certain survivors would ever recognize. VX097310. It lasted less than a second, but seconds were enough. The clink of silverware slowed. Coffee cups paused mid-sip. Conversations stumbled into silence as though the room itself had been caught between heartbeats. The three veterans behind her, men who had seen enough to rarely startle, were suddenly on their feet, eyes sharp, jaws set, like they'd just glimpsed a sign they thought the world had buried years ago. Two soldiers at the next table exchanged a glance. One gave a subtle shake of his head, the kind meant to dismiss a thought too dangerous to say out loud. The other set his mug down carefully, as though afraid the sound of porcelain might betray what they were both thinking. Laura straightened, notebook in hand, but her body gave away what her face did not. Shoulders tightening, posture sharpening, the instinctive scan of someone who had learned to read every flicker in a room like it might turn into a threat. Laura, Corinne Brooks's voice slipped through the tension like a needle. She was an instructor here at Fort Blackhawk, sharp, respected, and at least for now, the only ally Laura had. Corinne leaned closer, speaking quietly, though her eyes betrayed that she had already caught the sidelong stares. If what you just said earlier is real, then my soldiers will have a better chance of surviving. Laura's reply was soft, controlled. That's the goal. But her faint smile was a mask. Inside, the truth pressed against her ribs like something locked away too long. Dan Mercer, sitting across from her, set his coffee cup down with a sharp clack, an unintentional gavel, the kind of sound that marked invisible turning points. Then came a voice, low, steady, heavy with years that had tested it. Sounds like you've been there, haven't you? Laura turned. Master Sergeant Ray Collins, 58, with a weathered face carved by both desert wind and unspoken grief, was walking toward their table. His salt and pepper hair barely softened the authority in his presence. His uniform wasn't polished, but worn, lived in, every faded thread a story untold. His eyes were not curious. They were searching, comparing the woman in front of him to something in a file he had once read. Corinne introduced them, her voice careful. Ray, this is Laura West, our new training advisor. He gave the briefest of nods. What will my soldiers learn from you? Laura had heard that question before in other rooms from other men. She answered evenly. I was a combat medic, Afghanistan, 2007 to 2010, then emergency response stateside, then training. Collins paused, and for a moment his expression flickered, the recognition of someone pulling old memories out of a locked box. Those were hard years, he said quietly. We lost a lot of good people. The ones who came back carried things they never spoke of. Laura held his gaze, said nothing. Silence sometimes weighed more than words. But Corinne noticed the glance. Collins hadn't forgotten the glimpse of the tattoo, and neither had the others. Around them, the conversation drifted on to training protocols, yet Laura felt the undercurrent shifting. Soldiers at other tables leaned just enough to listen. Some stared too long at their trays, others pulled out their phones and tapped quickly under the table. She didn't need to guess what messages they sent. New advisor, unknown. Anyone recognize her? Served AFG. The air was no longer casual. It was testing her, measuring her. Morning light streamed through tall windows, painting streaks of gold across the polished floor. Laura glanced at her watch. 07:58. 2 minutes until her first session with Fort Blackhawk's elite medics. She rose, gathered her tray, and walked out. She could feel their eyes still on her, not hostile, not yet, but sharp, appraising the cold scrutiny that every outsider faced here. Fort Blackhawk was a place where respect wasn't given, it was earned, and the first 24 hours determined everything. The tattoo had already done its work. Rumors had found an anchor, and Laura knew by nightfall, whispers of VX097310 would echo across the base, passed from mouth to mouth like contraband. Her footsteps carried her down the corridor. Then the lights cut out. The deep, thunderous roar of helicopter rotors filled the silence, vibrating through steel and bone alike. Somewhere above, speakers blared war sounds into the air, and when the steel door to the medic training center shut behind her, the base outside disappeared completely. No marching boots, no engine rumble, only the sterile reflection of cold white light bouncing off spotless vinyl floors. 12 elite medics sat in a half-arc before her. They didn't rise to attention, but none sat casually either. Their posture carried something dangerous, discipline held in check by doubt. Civilians were rare here, and when they came, they were tested mercilessly. Laura placed her worn leather bag on the table. Its dark surface carried years of travel. Buckles dulled, edges scarred, but the stitching still strong. A bag carried not by someone who purchased it new, but by someone who had refused to quit no matter where the road tore at the seams. "Sit easy," she said, not loud but enough, her voice carried. "For the next 2 weeks I'll teach you what the manuals don't. Out there, gear will fail, orders will blur, and you'll have more wounded than you can possibly treat." From the second row, Sergeant First Class Juan Herrera raised a hand. Calm voice, but his eyes probed like scalpels. "Ma'am, the battlefield for a medic isn't the same as the front line. What have you seen that makes you qualified to teach us?" Laura didn't hesitate. Afghanistan, 2007 to 2010. FOBs, convoys, things that never made it into reports. A dry laugh cut from another seat. Corporal Luke Gray, arms crossed, skepticism plain. "Plenty of people served in Afghanistan. We need more than a resume. We need to know why your experience keeps us alive." Laura's reply was clipped, cold. "I'll show you." She walked to the control panel, pressed a button. The lights bled into deep red. Speakers thundered with explosions. The chop of rotor blades pressed down from ceiling vents, cold air rushing across their skin. No prep, no warning. Warm-up drill starts now. From 4 corners of the room, casualty mannequins rolled forward. Chest wounds, gut ruptures, amputations, arterial bleeds. A 15-minute clock flashed on the wall. Laura's voice cut like a blade. Guerrero, gray chest and abdominal. Herrera, Cox, amputations. The rest, casualty collection point. Prep for medevac, move. 2 minutes in, Guerrero's suction device sputtered, died. She froze. Laura's eyes locked on her. "Guerrero, gear's dead, what now?" I, she stammered, then snapped into motion. Grabbed a water bottle, sprayed hard into the airway. Not in the manual, but the fake blood slowed. Laura nodded. "Good. In the field, working gear is a luxury." Gray fumbled with a pressure bandage. "Need a proper wrap," he snapped. "You don't have one," Laura shot back. "Your casualty's bleeding out, 10 minutes. Teeth gritted, he hesitated. Laura dropped to her knees, yanked a t-shirt from the kit, twisted it into a tourniquet, clamped it over the artery, wrapped fast. The mannequin's heartbeat monitor stabilized. "Don't worship the tools," she said flatly. "Worship the principles." Her gaze cut to Gray, sharp enough to leave him wordless. The medics moved faster now. Cargo belts became straps, tubing from mock rifles became suction. Old gloves pressed wounds. Every object, every scrap became survival. The room shifted from doubt to sweat, from skepticism to rhythm. Then it happened again. Laura bent to check Herrera's casualty. Her shirt stretched, fabric tightening across her back. And for just a breath, the tattoo surfaced again. The hooked eagle, the numbers VX097310 stark across muscle and scar. This time Guerrero saw it, not as curiosity, but recognition. The kind of recognition that comes only from a classified file glimpsed once, in silence, behind clearance doors. She said nothing, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Someone in this room knew more than they should. The countdown blared, 5 minutes 4-3. The PA speakers cracked with an update. Medevac delayed, 12 more minutes. A muttered curse cut through the air. Herrera shifted positions. Guerrero shielded a casualty with her own body against simulated shrapnel. Gray, finally silent, followed orders with no argument. And in the center, Laura stood, scanning, calm, controlled, watching them begin to break free of the manual and find survival in the chaos. When the timer hit 0, the lights snapped back to white. The roar of rotors faded to silence. Laura stepped forward. Her words were steady. Tomorrow, it won't just be casualties. You'll see things you don't want to imagine. She locked the panel, slung her bag, walked out. The steel door sealed shut behind her. And 12 medics sat in silence, realizing that the next 2 weeks would either change them or crush them. Why were they standing in the rain, shivering before dawn, with no explanation except the sound of a siren? No one had finished their coffee. No one had even spoken beyond muttered curses as they were herded outside into the morning mist. Jackets soaked, boots sinking into wet mud, 12 elite medics stood in formation, waiting. And she was already there. Laura West, rain shell zipped to the throat, hood down, hair plastered to her forehead as if the storm itself had bowed to her presence. She didn't explain, didn't soften the command. Today, she said, voice cutting through the weather, we work outside. Behind her, the training field had been transformed. What yesterday was a neat stretch of dirt and gravel was now chaos reborn. Collapsed brick walls, charred APC husks smoking like the dead. Plumes of colored smoke curled from alleys, swallowing the horizon in shifting clouds of red, green, and yellow. Loudspeakers hidden in ruined corners screamed gunfire, explosions, voices begging for help. The medics shifted uneasily. No briefing, no structure, just immersion in war. You will move 1 mile through this terrain, Laura said. Treat the wounded. Extract before enemy contact. Time limit 20 minutes. No questions, no complaints. These soldiers had been broken of that instinct long before. Herrera led. Guerrero followed close, pack already shifting across her shoulders. Gray took rear guard, suspicion in his eyes but rain streaming down his face, washing away any room for bravado. They moved into the village. The rain turned dirt to sludge. Boots sucked into the mud with each step. The first casualty lay where rubble swallowed him, abdomen torn, pulse faint, eyes already rolling. Guerrero dropped to her knees. Hands steady, she began the work, blood thick under her gloves. Then the blast. A mortar thudded nearby, simulated but close enough to shake the ribs. Smoke bloomed. From behind the ruins, a figure stumbled forward, an actor, shirt drenched crimson, clutching his side. Civilian screaming. Not in the scenario, Gray barked, eyes on the original casualty. Leave them, stick to mission. Guerrero froze, torn between protocol and instinct. Laura's voice cut across the storm, calm but edged with steel. Your choice saves or kills someone. Decide now. The weight hung in the rain. Guerrero's jaw clenched. She grabbed the civilian, dragging him into cover. Gray's glare was venom, but Laura gave no sign of approval or reproach. She only watched. They pressed forward. 300 meters to the objective. Narrow street. Speakers roared with new thunder, enemy approaching 2 minutes out. Herrera dropped into position, weapon slung across his back as he ripped open a casualty kit, only to find what wasn't there. Pressure wraps, morphine, gone. Removed by her. Laura stood still as a shadow, eyes hard. Improvise. Herrera's breath steamed in the cold. He ripped a sling from his rifle, wrapped it tight, pulled a scarf from an actor's discarded pack. Field solutions, not perfect, but maybe enough. And then it was Gray. Rear guard. Paintball rounds cracked against walls, bright red bursts exploding on concrete. He cursed, stumbling as two found his chest, one his shoulder, marked dead. He gritted his teeth, dragged the stretcher behind cover. Laura dropped beside him, rain streaking her face, helped Guerrero lift. Her raincoat shifted, and the tattoo surfaced again, black ink of a war eagle, talons spread, wings hooked around a faint compass. And the numbers, VX097310. Herrera froze mid-tourniquet, his voice was hoarse. "Ma'am, that." Laura straightened, covered it, voice colder than the rain. "Focus on your casualty, Sergeant." The silence afterward was heavier than the storm. 50 meters to extraction. Enemy fire pressed closer. Smoke burned the lungs. Guerrero slipped, nearly dropping the stretcher. "Hold on," Gray barked, teeth clenched as he lunged forward, taking another hit across his back. Laura grabbed the other side. Muscles straining, boots tearing into the mud, she sprinted with them. "Move, don't look back." The gate loomed. Yellow light flicked alive as they broke through, clock striking 0. The PA cut. The battlefield noise fell silent. "Index," a voice crackled. Laura exhaled, slow, controlled. She turned to the soaked, mud-streaked medics, faces pale, eyes locked on her. "Herrera," she said. "Field tourniquet beats dying while waiting for perfect gear. Good." Her eyes slid to Guerrero. "Civilian extraction, risky, acceptable." Then Gray, 2 hits. "In real life you're gone before your casualty's safe." Gray said nothing. His jaw tightened, but his silence told more than his anger ever could. Laura let the pause linger, then spoke with that same flat certainty. "The battlefield doesn't care about the manual. From now on, neither do you." She walked off, rain hammering her shoulders, leaving 12 medics standing in the mud, their minds turning circles around the question they would not ask aloud. Who is Laura West? The rain didn't stop. It thickened, washing the training field into rivers. The medics thought the drill was over, that they'd earned rest. Until Laura called them back. Second scenario, no warning, no pre-brief. "Details," she said, "come over radio during movement." They deployed. Static hissed through headsets. Guerrero caught fragments. "Casualty Building 7, enemy fire." Herrera frowned. "Are they simulating live fire? I didn't hear Ramos authorize." Laura's voice cut across him. "On the battlefield, no one asks before shooting at you." 5 minutes in, they turned into an alley. Gunfire cracked, sharp, real, not paintball pops, not recorded sound. Gray froze. "What the hell, that's live." A shadow flickered on a rooftop. Rifle aimed down, not standard issue. Scorched wood stock, mercenary weapon. Herrera's stomach dropped. He knew that design. Narvac border. Only one kind of enemy carried those. Laura didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. "Cover the casualty," she snapped. "Herrera, hold position." From her pack she pulled what should have been a training carbine, except the magazine was not paint. It was real, wrapped in waterproof cloth. Rain streaked her eyes. She raised, aimed, 1 heartbeat. Fired. The rooftop figure crumpled, weapon clattering across the concrete. Silence swallowed the alley. Her coat shifted again. The tattoo was fully visible now. The hooked beak, the compass, the numbers that should not exist anymore. Herrera's blood ran cold. He remembered the whispers. Operation Shadow Talon, a covert unit erased from the books, a mission that officially never happened. 12 years ago, Narvac border. A chemical bomb plot stopped in silence, and only 4 walked away. All records erased, all names lost. And yet here it was, ink on her back, a ghost branded into living skin. Laura's voice was ice. "Move." No one argued. They hauled the casualty out, through the rain, through the silence that weighed heavier than any battlefield roar. Back at the safe zone, Gray's hand still shook, his voice cracked. That wasn't training, that was real. Laura laid the carbine down, checked each medic in turn. Everyone intact, no injuries, exercise over. Herrera tried to speak, but Laura's eyes caught his, cold, deep, final. The kind of stare that shuts down questions before they form. Minutes later, MPs swarmed the training grounds. Security lights swept. Radios crackled about intruders. But the rumor had already spread faster than the rain. Someone had fired live rounds during training. Karen Brooks found her later, voice taut. "I have to report this." "Report it," Laura said evenly, "but don't put in the file what you can't prove." Karen hesitated, swallowed hard, then walked away. Herrera fell in step beside Laura on the return to quarters. His voice was low, tight. "VX097310, I've seen that in a report. Shadow Talon. They said all of them died, except—" Laura cut him off, words flat as stone. "Sergeant, sometimes knowing less keeps you alive longer." He stopped, let her walk on alone into the storm. In his mind, puzzle pieces began locking together, and the picture they formed was dangerous. Why did the command center, lights feel colder than the rain outside? Fort Blackhawk's walls had never seemed this close, this watchful. The storm still hammered the glass beyond, but in here the air was too still, too sharp. A place where truth was not spoken freely, only measured, weighed, and sometimes buried. Laura sat at the long conference table alone, turning a steel mug slowly in her hands. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes were elsewhere, scanning the rhythm of rain on the window, listening for patterns, as though she expected danger not from outside, but from the very people who had summoned her here. The door opened. Sergeant Major Ramos entered first, shoulders square, the kind of leader whose authority filled a room before his voice ever did. Behind him came Karen Brooks, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield, and Master Sergeant Ray Collins, eyes heavy, unreadable. Ramos didn't waste time. He sat opposite Laura. No notebook, no pen. His hands folded on the table as though to say, "This conversation won't exist on record." "Miss West," he said, voice deep but controlled, "I want your account of the incident, specifically how you took the shot." Laura placed the mug down gently, met his gaze. "An intruder entered with a live weapon. I acted to protect the trainees. Result, 0 injuries. Training objectives met, despite the situation exceeding plan parameters." Her voice was steady, but the silence afterward carried weight. Collins spoke next, words deliberate, dragging. "That kind of reaction doesn't come from civilian training." Karen stepped forward, almost hesitant, and tapped her tablet. A projector hummed to life. On the wall, frozen in gray light, appeared the image. The rooftop, the falling mercenary, and Laura, shoulder twisted, rifle locked, eyes burning. But it was the tattoo that stole the room. Clear, unmistakable, the war eagle, the compass, and the code VX097310. Karen's voice was low, almost apologetic. "I searched the military database. No unit is registered to that insignia." Laura allowed herself the faintest smile. Not mockery, not pride, just resignation. Some things aren't registered. Ramos folded his arms. "We found signs the intruder wasn't working alone. Possibility exists he was testing the base's response." Collins's gaze flicked to Laura. "If that's true, then he has his answer, and that answer will make you a target." Her reply came soft but unnervingly calm. "Wouldn't be the first time." The meeting ended not with closure but with a fracture. No raised voices, no accusations, only unspoken weight settling into each of them, heavier than thunderclouds outside. When the others filed out, Collins lingered. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by amber strips running along the walls. Rain streaked down the glass, muting everything into a blur. He stopped her with a word that carried both hesitation and certainty. VX097310. Laura turned slowly, her silhouette outlined against the storm outside. I've heard it before, Collins said quietly. Shadow Talon, Narvak 2011, mission didn't exist, and no one made it out alive. She stepped closer, only an arm's length away. Her voice was low, almost intimate, the kind of whisper that carried weight like a confession. That report is wrong in one detail. Collins's eyes narrowed, searching hers. What detail? Her lips barely moved. One person survived, and you're talking to her. For the first time in years, Collins felt the ground shift beneath him. He stepped back half a pace, not in fear, but in recognition of something greater than what he had wanted to find. Laura adjusted her jacket, pulling the fabric over the tattoo once more. Her eyes softened only enough to betray one truth. She did not want this conversation, but she could not stop it anymore. Sergeant, she said, voice almost tender in its warning, if you want a long life, forget this. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. She walked away, boots echoing in the hollow corridor. Collins stood still, rain thickening against the glass behind him, silence heavier than any battlefield. He knew he should stop her, should press harder, but something in her eyes had told him what no report ever could. This was not about history. It was about survival. His. Outside, the storm swallowed her silhouette as she crossed the courtyard. And then she froze. A black SUV sat parked near the barracks, engine cold. Rain streaked down its windshield. On the glass lay a small metal tag. Laura stepped closer, lifted it with trembling fingers. It was engraved with the same eagle etched into her back, but not the same code. This one read, VX09E732. Her grip tightened, rain dripping from her clenched fist. No one alive should know that number, except 3 people. And 2 of them had been dead for 12 years. She closed her eyes, breath steady, though inside something cracked open, a fracture between the woman she was trying to be and the soldier the world refused to let die. When she entered the barracks, the tag hidden in her pocket, suspicion had already spread across the base like wildfire. The medics whispered in corners, phones lit up in the dark, rumors grew teeth. And somewhere outside Fort Blackhawk, in the wet silence of Narvak memories resurrected, the game had just begun again. Why did the air in Fort Blackhawk suddenly feel like it belonged to strangers? The next morning began with silence, not sirens. No drills, no instructions, just a fog of unease that followed Laura wherever she went. In the mess hall, soldiers who had once greeted Corinne Brooks or nodded at Collins now stared through Laura as if she were both invisible and too visible at the same time. Phones lit up when she walked by. Conversations stuttered when she entered a room. And when she sat down, whole tables seemed to rearrange themselves, leaving space that felt more like an exile than respect. Laura kept her shoulders straight, tray balanced, expression unreadable. But inside, something she had learned to suppress long ago returned with a quiet sting. It was the same feeling she'd carried stepping off the plane after Afghanistan. The way strangers stared at her uniform like it carried weight they couldn't understand. Pride and shame braided into one. A soldier welcomed home, but never entirely let in. Now even here she felt it again, alone in a room full of uniforms. Across the hall, Guerrero caught her eye, then quickly looked away. Gray didn't bother hiding his stare. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, jaw tight, as if daring her to prove she belonged. Herrera gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement, but his gaze carried a question she refused to answer. Corinne Brooks slid into the seat beside Laura, lowering her voice. They've been whispering since last night. The story about the live round, it's already twisted into a dozen different versions. Some say you staged it. Others say you're part of some ghost unit. Shadow Talon. The name scraped the air like broken glass. Laura didn't flinch, only cut her eggs with the edge of a fork, eating with mechanical precision. "People will believe what they want," she said flatly. Karen hesitated. "And what do you want them to believe?" Laura set the fork down, finally meeting her eyes. "That they can survive the field, nothing else matters." But she knew it wasn't true. Because the tag was still in her pocket, heavy, cold, VX09E732, a number that shouldn't exist, a message that someone out there was not only alive but watching. The rest of the morning bled into silence. Training drills continued, but the medic's rhythm faltered. Instructions came slower, compliance weaker. Trust was a muscle and it had torn. Gray was the first to let it show. During a trauma simulation when Laura barked, "Pressure now," he threw the gauze down with a snap. "No," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're not your shadow soldiers. You think we don't see it? That tattoo, that shot. You don't train like us. You don't move like us. You hide it, whatever you are." The room went still. Laura's jaw flexed, but her voice remained steady. "Pick up the gauze, Corporal." Gray didn't move. "Not until you tell us what VX097310 means." Herrera shifted uncomfortably, but didn't intervene. Guerrero froze, torn between respect for command and the truth that burned on her tongue. Laura stepped closer, boots firm, eyes locked. "The battlefield won't stop to let you satisfy your curiosity. Your casualty is bleeding out and your ego is in the way. That's how people die, Gray." Her words cut, but her calm was scarier than anger. Gray bent slowly, grudgingly, pressing the gauze down. His voice was a growl. "You're hiding something, and if we're supposed to trust you with our lives, then you owe us the truth." Laura turned away, forcing herself not to let her hands shake. Truth, the word followed her like a shadow, and she knew it wasn't just Gray's suspicion, it was everyone's. That night the storm returned. Laura sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the metal tag. The engraved eagle caught the dim barracks light, mocking her. Her mind dragged her back 12 years. Narvik, Operation Shadow Talon, the night that had torn her unit apart. She remembered the gas curling through tunnels, burning lungs, tearing skin. The way men she trusted had screamed into static radios until silence swallowed them. The final breach, the chemical drum glowing faint in the dark, and the decision she'd made that no report ever recorded. Only 4 of them had crawled out, and within months, 3 of those 4 were buried in unmarked graves. She had told herself for years that she'd been spared for a reason, that her survival was a burden meant to be used. But now, seeing that tag, knowing someone else was alive, the burden twisted into a threat. Who, she wondered, and why now? A knock broke the silence. Collins stood at the door. He didn't ask permission, just stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. "They don't trust you," he said. "Not cruel, just fact." Laura set the tag down, face hardening. "I don't need their trust, I need their focus." You can't train soldiers who think their teacher is lying to them. She looked away, jaw tight. "Truth gets people killed, Sergeant." Collins studied her for a long moment. His weathered eyes carried no judgment, only the slow ache of a man who had buried too many friends. "You carry yourself like someone who's already buried too much," he said. "But if you keep locking the doors inside you, one day you won't have anything left to protect." His words found a crack she hadn't expected. For the first time in days, her throat tightened, breath hitching. She masked it with a bitter laugh. "You think I don't know what it feels like to lose everything? That tattoo doesn't make me proud. It makes me haunted." Collins didn't push further. He simply nodded, the kind of nod soldiers gave each other when no solution existed, only endurance. Then he left, leaving her alone with the rain and the silence and the memory of shadows that refused to die. The next day, Fort Blackhawk woke under tighter security. MPs patrolled in pairs. Camera sweeps doubled. Whispers spoke of mercenaries testing the perimeter, of coded transmissions intercepted on nearby frequencies. The medics felt it too. Training drills grew tense, focus split between their work and the gnawing fear that something real was coming. During an urban extraction scenario, Guerrero leaned close enough for Laura to hear, voice trembling despite her steady hands. "Ma'am, whoever they are, they're coming back, aren't they?" Laura's reply was clipped, "They never left." And she knew, in her bones, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to break within these walls. Because someone had marked her. And someone was waiting. Why did the alarms wail at 02:17 in the morning, ripping soldiers out of their bunks before their dreams had time to die? The siren wasn't scheduled. This wasn't a drill. The sharp, rising howl carried something colder, the unmistakable edge of real danger. Laura was already awake. Sleep hadn't come easy in days. She sat on the edge of her bunk, boots laced, jacket zipped, the metal tag still heavy in her pocket like a curse. The medics stumbled into the corridor, some half-dressed, some dragging gear. Herrera barked for order. Guerrero clutched her rifle like it was the only anchor she had. Gray's eyes were wild, not from fear, but from the vindication of suspicion finally confirmed. Laura's voice cut through the chaos. "Gear on, full kit, move." No one questioned her tone. Outside, floodlights tore across the compound. MPs scrambled. The main gate stood locked, but somewhere beyond the wire, gunfire cracked against the night. Not training blanks, not paint rounds, live fire. Collins appeared at her side, rifle slung, jaw hard. Perimeter breach. Unknown numbers. MPs engaged, but whoever they are, they knew where to hit. Ramos's voice bellowed over the comms. All non-essential personnel inside. Lockdown protocols in effect. But the medics weren't non-essential tonight. Laura turned to them, scanning their faces, their suspicion, their doubt, their fear. "You're medics, and medics don't get the luxury of hiding. Where others fall, you move." The words landed like steel. For the first time, none of them argued. They sprinted toward the motor pool, boots pounding wet pavement. The night smelled of oil and ozone, a storm brewing above. The first casualty appeared by the fuel depot, an MP clutching his thigh, blood pouring through his fingers. Guerrero dropped beside him, hands working before thought. Herrera covered, scanning the darkness. Laura crouched low, eyes narrowing toward the shadows beyond the fence. Muzzle flashes flickered in the tree line, too organized to be chance. Gray hissed, "This is an attack, not training, not rumor, this is real." Laura's jaw tightened. "Keep your head, Corporal, you'll live longer." She spotted movement, two shadows breaking from the trees, darting low. Mercenaries, Narvek style, fast and precise. Without hesitation, she ripped her rain shell open. The carbine slung inside came free in one motion, magazine already loaded. One shot cracked the night. A shadow fell, the other scattered back into the woods. The medics froze, realizing what she carried wasn't training gear. Gray's voice was a whisper but full of venom. "You've been preparing for this. You knew." Laura didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the tree line. "I knew it was only a matter of time." The compound erupted into controlled chaos. Orders barked. Vehicles roared. Sirens split the air. And through it all, the medics moved under Laura's direction, dragging casualties, patching wounds, improvising under fire. Herrera tied off a femoral bleed with a belt torn from his own waist. Guerrero shoved IV lines through shaking hands. Even Gray, muttering curses, pressed chest seals with mechanical precision. They worked because she told them to. They survived because she knew how. And then came the explosion. The motor pool lit up in fire as a fuel truck detonated, heat slamming the ground like a giant's fist. The blast threw soldiers against concrete. Laura hit the dirt, ears ringing, lungs burning. She forced herself up, scanning. Herrera staggered to his feet. Guerrero screamed for help, Gray had taken shrapnel, blood streaking his arm. Laura sprinted, shoved pressure onto the wound. "Stay with me, Corporal." Gray's teeth clenched, breath ragged. I told you you're hiding something." Laura met his gaze. "I'm hiding nothing that will save you now. Bite down." She tightened the tourniquet. His scream vanished into the roar of flames. Overhead, floodlights died. Power gone. The compound sank into darkness, broken only by firelight and muzzle flashes. Collins's voice roared over comms. "Secondary breach. East wall compromised." Laura's stomach clenched. This wasn't random. They weren't here to cripple Fort Blackhawk. They were here for her. The tag in her pocket seemed to burn against her thigh. VX09E732. She turned to the medics, voices shaking, hands bloodied, faces pale. They weren't ready for this. They hadn't signed up for her shadow. But she had no choice. "Form up," she commanded. "We're moving to the east wall. Casualties in that sector won't last without you." Herrera hesitated, sweat streaking mud down his face. "Ma'am, is this training or war?" Laura's eyes burned in the firelight. "Both, and if you're asking, you're already late." They moved. Through smoke, through gunfire, through the taste of iron and rain. At the east wall, the breach gaped like a wound. Concertina wire torn, concrete blasted. MPs fired blindly into the trees. And through the gap, another body lay screaming. An engineer shredded by shrapnel, leg nearly gone. Guerrero dropped to him without hesitation. Hands slick with blood, she screamed for more bandages. Herrera ripped his own sleeve, pressing fabric into the wound. Gray leaned against the wall, pale but working, sealing chest wounds on a second casualty dragged in. Laura stood in the breach, rifle raised, eyes locked on the tree line. Shapes moved there, patient, watching. She knew this wasn't the main assault. This was pressure, noise, a test. And then through the smoke she saw it. Another figure, black gear, rifle slung, not firing, watching. In his hand, something glinted. A metal tag. Her tag. Laura's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the battlefield vanished, replaced with a tunnel 12 years past, Narvac's stench cloying her lungs, the sound of her unit dying around her. And she knew. Someone else had survived. Her rifle wavered. For the first time, her hands trembled. The figure lifted the tag, just enough for her to see the engraving, before slipping back into the shadows. The gunfire ceased as quickly as it had come. Silence rolled in, broken only by the crackle of fire and the moans of wounded men. Ramos's voice bellowed through comms. "All sectors secure. Repeat, secure. Breach contained." But Laura knew the truth. This wasn't victory. This was invitation. She lowered her rifle, eyes scanning the black tree line, heart thundering not from the fight but from the ghost it carried. The medic slumped against the wall, breath ragged, bloodied, exhausted. Guerrero's hands shook as she pressed the last dressing. Herrera wiped sweat and soot from his face. Gray looked at her with something different now, not just suspicion but fear. Laura turned from them, hiding the fracture in her own armor. Because whoever had survived Narvac was here, watching, waiting. And they weren't finished. Why did the silence afterward feel louder than the battle itself? Fort Blackhawk looked nothing like it had the night before. Floodlights hummed again, cutting harsh white beams through smoke and ruin. MPs moved in tight pairs, rifles sweeping, boots crunching across shattered glass. The motor pools still smoldered, flames beaten down but not dead, their smoke trailing like black scars into the early dawn. Stretchers lined the courtyard. Medics, real and trainee, worked shoulder to shoulder, wrapping, stitching, stabilizing. The air smelled of blood and burned fuel, and under it all something heavier, fear that didn't fade with daylight. Laura stood apart, arms crossed, eyes locked on the eastern tree line where the breach had been. The gap in the concrete had been sealed with steel plating overnight, but her mind kept tearing it open again, replaying the shadow she'd seen. The man with the tag, the silent recognition. Her fingers brushed her pocket where the other tag still rested. VX09E732. Someone else had survived Narvak, someone who knew her code, and whoever he was, he hadn't come to kill her. Not yet. Karen Brooks approached, tablet under her arm, hair tied back but strands escaping in the damp air. She studied Laura's profile before speaking, as if testing the wind. Official report calls it a probing attack. Small cell. Maybe Narvak mercenaries testing the perimeter. Laura's reply was clipped. That's not what it was. Karen frowned. Then what was it? Laura didn't look away from the trees. A message. Karen exhaled, frustration bleeding into fear. Laura, people are already asking questions we can't answer. Command wants explanations. The medics are divided. Gray swears you're dragging them into something bigger than training. Herrera, he wants to trust you, but he's not blind. And Guerrero's caught in the middle. If this keeps up, you won't just lose them, you'll lose the whole base. Finally, Laura turned. Her eyes were cold, but something softer trembled behind them. I didn't ask them to trust me. I asked them to learn. Karen's voice broke sharper. And what if the lesson cost them their lives? The question hung like smoke. Laura said nothing. Hours passed. Dawn bled into gray morning. The medics were gathered in the training hall, restless, their faces lined with exhaustion and doubt. Laura stepped in. The room stiffened, not to attention but into something sharper, a brittle silence. Herrera leaned forward in his chair, elbows on knees, eyes searching her. Guerrero's hands twisted together in her lap, jaw tight, waiting for answers that wouldn't come. And Gray didn't hide his scowl. Laura stood at the front, shoulders squared. You saw last night. You know the line between drills and war doesn't exist anymore. You worked under fire. You saved lives. That's what matters. Gray barked a laugh, harsh, bitter. That's all, just another day's work. Don't stand there and act like you didn't know this was coming. You had a rifle, real rounds. You fired without hesitation. You didn't look surprised, you looked ready. The others flinched, but Gray pressed on, his voice rising. You're not here to train us. You're here because of them. Whoever hit that wall wasn't here for Fort Blackhawk. They were here for you, and you dragged us into it. Guerrero whispered, Gray, stop. No, his voice cracked, raw. She owes us the truth. VX097310 Shadow Talon. The stories say they all died, except somehow she didn't. And now the ghosts she left behind are knocking on our gates. The words echoed, heavy, electric. Laura didn't flinch, didn't move. Her silence was both shield and weapon. Herrera broke it, voice steady but strained. Ma'am, is it true? The room held its breath. Laura looked at each of them one by one. Guerrero's desperate eyes, Herrera's steady doubt, Gray's raw anger. And she said only, sometimes the truth keeps you alive. Sometimes it kills you faster. Decide which you want. She turned, walked out. The door shut like a verdict. Behind her, voices clashed. Gray cursing, Guerrero defending, Herrera trying to calm the storm. But the fracture was real now. A unit could not move as one when half believed their leader was a lie. That night, Laura didn't return to her bunk. She walked the perimeter instead, boots sinking into mud, rain returning in soft sheets. Every shadow looked like memory. Every gust of wind carried the echo of Narvak. And then she stopped. On the fence, hanging by a strip of wire, another tag gleamed in the rain. Her stomach dropped as she pulled it free. VX09E733. The third number. Her hands shook, each tag a breadcrumb, each one narrowing the circle. 12 years ago, there had been 4 survivors. She had buried 3. But if these tags were real, if they weren't just meant to haunt her, then one of them, at least one, was alive. And maybe not alone. Her breath clouded in the cold. A question clawed at her chest, heavier than the storm. If they survived, Then why come back now? Behind her, the compound lights flickered, power strain, another storm on the grid. And from somewhere deep in the tree line, far enough to be untouchable but close enough to chill the blood, a flare arced into the sky. Red, bright, deliberate. Not a signal of war, a signal of recognition. Laura clenched the tag in her fist until the metal bit her skin. The message was clear. The past was no longer past. It was coming for her, for all of them. Why did every shadow in Fort Blackhawk now feel like it carried eyes? The night after the flare, the base didn't sleep. Floodlights stayed on until morning, stretching pale halos into the fog. Patrols doubled. Radios buzzed without pause. Every creak of the fences, every gust through the trees, every echo of boots set nerves on edge. But the enemy didn't come. No breach, no fire, just silence stretched too tight like a string ready to snap. Laura sat alone in the operations room, staring at the metal tags laid out in front of her. 3 now. VX09E732, VX09E733, VX097310. The numbers weren't random. They were a sequence. A chain that once belonged to Shadow Talon, each code burned into skin, etched into memory, erased from the world. And yet here they were, resurfacing like bones in shallow earth. She closed her eyes, hearing voices she hadn't allowed herself to hear in years. The laughter in Narvak tunnels before everything went wrong. The crack of rifles echoing in poison-dark air. The last breath of men who trusted her with their lives. She had buried them. She had watched them buried. So who was leaving these? The door opened. Collins stepped in, quiet as always, his presence heavy without trying. His eyes dropped to the table, to the tags. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, they're alive, aren't they? Laura didn't look up. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. At least one of them. Collins leaned on the table, his weathered hands braced like he was holding back the weight of years. If it's true, why not show themselves? Why games? Why now? Laura lifted one tag between her fingers, letting the light catch the eagle. Because whoever it is doesn't want Fort Blackhawk, doesn't want the army. They want me. Collins studied her, lines deepening in his face. Then you're not just training medics, you're a liability. Her jaw tightened. She met his eyes. Or I'm the only reason they're still alive. The silence between them was sharp. Then came the knock. Karen Brooks stood in the doorway, tension carved into her face. Command wants you, now. Laura followed her through corridors thick with whispers. Soldiers stopped talking when she passed. Medics looked away. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, listening. In the command center, Ramos waited with a half-circle of officers. The air smelled of stale coffee and urgency. Miss West, Ramos said, voice cutting through the room, we have a problem. Surveillance caught movement along the northern ridge. Too organized to be wildlife, too quiet to be amateurs. Whoever hit us hasn't left. Karen pulled up the footage. Grainy. Shadows slipping between trees. No clear faces, but the formation was there, deliberate, disciplined. Ramos's gaze pinned Laura. And we both know they're not here for my base. They're here for you. Laura stood straighter, refusing to flinch. Then use me, make me the bait. The room erupted, officers protesting, Karen paling, Collins muttering a curse. Ramos raised a hand. Silence fell, his eyes locked on Laura. You'd risk that. Her reply was calm, but her heart pounded. They won't stop until they have me. Better to set the field ourselves than wait for them to choose it. Karen's voice cracked. And what if you're wrong? What if they're not after you? Laura glanced at the tag still in her pocket. The weight of ghosts was answer enough. That night the trap was set. The medics didn't know details, only that another exercise had been called, midnight movement into the northern sector. They moved like they had before, rain slicking their gear, mud sucking at their boots. But this time, unease rode heavier. This time the silence felt alive. Guerrero walked close to Laura, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "Ma'am, why us? Why not send regular infantry?" Laura didn't answer. Because the truth was unbearable. She needed them close, not for their training, but because if things went wrong, they were the only ones she trusted to keep her alive. The forest swallowed them, branches dripping cold water, the moon a fractured glow through leaves. Herrera led, Gray brought up the rear, jaw still set with mistrust but eyes sharper now. Fear had carved honesty into him. They reached the ridge. And then came the voice. Not over comms, not through speakers, from the tree line itself. Low, male, familiar enough to freeze Laura's breath. "You're late." The medics whipped around, rifles raised. Shadows shifted between trunks until one figure stepped forward. Hood drawn, rifle slung, posture calm. Laura's chest tightened. It couldn't be. But it was. "Eli," she breathed. The name slipped out before she could stop it. Herrera blinked, confused. Guerrero looked between them. Gray's mouth opened, closed, his suspicion tilting toward something worse, fear. The man lowered his hood. His face was older, scars cut deep across his jaw, hair streaked with gray. But his eyes were the same. The same eyes she'd last seen in a Narvac tunnel, smoke choking them, both of them crawling toward light. "VX09E732, he said, voice steady. "Ring any bells?" The tag in her pocket burned against her skin. "You died," she whispered. He smiled without warmth. "So did you." The forest swallowed the words, heavy, final. Behind her the medics shifted, lost, caught in a storm they couldn't understand. Gray spat, voice breaking. "Who the hell is this?" Laura's throat closed. The answer wasn't easy, wasn't safe, but it was truth. "He was one of mine, Shadow Talon." The words landed like thunder. The medics froze, realization crashing over them. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't myth. Their trainer wasn't just haunted by ghosts, she was one. Eli's eyes narrowed. "You trained them just like the rest. You think you can save them like you couldn't save us." Laura stepped forward, chest heaving, rain dripping from her hood. "You don't understand." "No," he cut her off. "You don't. You were supposed to die, Laura, we all were, that was the point, but you lived, and now every ghost left behind wants its due." The medics shifted uneasily, rifles uncertain. Herrera whispered, "Ma'am, what is he talking about?" Laura didn't answer, couldn't. Because the truth wasn't just dangerous, it was poison. Eli lifted another tag, gleaming in the rain. VX09E734. The fourth, the last. He tossed it at her feet. "Game, not over," he said, then vanished back into the trees as silently as he'd come. The forest fell still. Laura bent, fingers trembling as she picked up the tag. 4 numbers, 4 ghosts. The medics stared at her in silence. No one spoke. And Laura knew with a bone-deep certainty that the next step wouldn't be training, wouldn't be drills, wouldn't even be defense. It would be reckoning. Why did the night feel heavier than any battle she had ever fought? The ridge was quiet now. Eli was gone, but his presence lingered in the damp air like smoke after fire. Laura clutched the 4th tag in her hand until the metal cut her skin. VX09E734. The last number, the last ghost. The medics stared at her. Rain streaked down their faces, but their silence screamed louder than questions. Herrera finally broke it, voice hoarse. "Ma'am, what the hell is going on?" Laura's throat tightened. She wanted to tell them the truth. She wanted to bury it forever. Both impulses warred in her chest until all she could manage was. Shadow Talon was real, and it was never supposed to be. The words hung in the rain. Gray shook his head, face twisted with anger. "You dragged us into something we never signed up for. You're using us as cover for your ghosts." Guerrero's voice trembled, "But she saved us. Last night she saved herself," Gray snapped. "We just happened to be in the way." Laura didn't argue, she couldn't. The truth cut too close. The trek back to Fort Blackhawk was silent. No questions, no trust, just the steady rhythm of boots in mud and the weight of the tags pressing against her. When they reached the compound, command was already waiting. Ramos stood rigid, Karen beside him, Collins in the shadows. "You've made contact," Ramos said flatly. "Not a question." Laura nodded once. "Eli." Karen's eyes widened. "You know him." Laura's voice was sharp. "I buried him." Ramos's jaw tightened. "Then he's not alone, and he won't stop." The room shifted into motion. Maps spread, patrols reassigned, security tripled. But Laura knew the truth none of them wanted to admit. Fort Blackhawk wasn't ready. This wasn't just an attack. It was personal. That night Laura sat in her quarters, the tags lined up on the desk before her. 4 numbers, 4 survivors. She had thought survival was her curse. Now it was her connection. The knock came just past midnight. She opened the door to find Herrera. His face was pale but steady. "Ma'am," he said, "we need to know. If we're going to follow you, we need the truth." Behind him stood Guerrero, eyes pleading and even gray, arms crossed but silent. Laura looked at them, and for the first time in years she let her guard drop. Shadow Talon was a mission in Narvak, covert, off the books. We were sent to stop a chemical bomb plot. 12 went in, 4 crawled out. She swallowed hard. The others didn't die clean. They were erased. Their names, their records, their families told they never existed. I was supposed to be one of them, but I lived. And for 12 years I carried that silence. Her voice broke. Now someone else lived too, and he wants me to pay for it. The medics said nothing. Their eyes told her everything, fear, doubt, but also something else, something closer to understanding. Gray finally spoke, softer than she expected. "So what now?" Laura looked at the tags. "Now we finish what Narvek started." The attack came at dawn. It wasn't subtle this time. Explosions ripped the eastern wall. Mortar fire lit the compound. MPs scrambled, alarms howling. Laura grabbed her rifle, the medics at her side. The base shook with the force of a war it hadn't prepared for. Eli's voice carried over loudspeakers hijacked by the enemy. Calm, cold. "Laura West, VX097310, come out, or they keep dying." Soldiers froze at the sound. Some looked at her, others backed away. Laura's chest burned. This was it, the reckoning. She turned to Herrera, Guerrero, Gray. "You don't follow me now. You'll never come back." They followed anyway. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke, fire, shouts. Laura moved through it like memory, her body remembering Narvak, every instinct sharpened by ghosts. She dropped mercenaries with precision, pulled wounded from fire, guided her medics as they patched and saved and bled beside her. Then she saw him. Eli, standing beyond the flames, rifle lowered, waiting. Laura pushed through the smoke until it was just the two of them. 12 years fell away. The tunnels, the screams, the choice she had made. "You should have stayed dead," Eli said, voice like steel. "So should you," she replied. His eyes burned. "We were betrayed, Laura. Someone wanted us erased. And you were the loose end they never tied." She shook her head. "No, I was the one who carried it. The one who kept it buried so the rest of you wouldn't be dragged back into the dark." "You call this buried?" He lifted the tags, jingling them like chains. "We're still here. We're the proof they couldn't burn it all away. And now everyone will know." Her rifle was steady, but her heart was. "Eli," she said softly, "this isn't justice, it's vengeance. And vengeance doesn't rebuild anything, it only burns." For a moment his face cracked. The boy she'd once known flickered in his eyes. The one who had laughed in tunnels, who had whispered jokes in the dark to keep fear at bay. Then it was gone. He raised his rifle. The shot echoed. When the smoke cleared, Eli was on the ground. His tag slipped from his hand, landing in the mud beside the others. Laura stood frozen, rifle trembling, the medics behind her silent. Collins's voice carried over the comms, "Sector secure." But nothing felt secure, not anymore. Laura knelt, picked up the last tag, and closed Eli's eyes. "Rest now," she whispered. The medics gathered around her, silent, bloodied, changed. They had seen her truth. They had fought her ghosts, and somehow they were still here. Later, when the fires burned low and the base held its breath in fragile peace, Laura stood alone by the wall, the 4 tags in her hand. Sometimes survival isn't victory. Sometimes it's just unfinished business. She let the tags fall into the mud, the rain washing over them, carrying them away into the earth. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more than orders ever could. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that, Laura West turned, walking back into Fort Blackhawk not as a ghost, not as a secret, but as a woman who had finally stopped running from the truth.